Alrighty, so our first story is from justthenews.com. China on Sunday threatened to respond after the United States shot down a suspected spy balloon that flew over sensitive military sites while U.S. armed forces are currently recovering the aircraft. China will resolutely safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of the company concerned and reserves the rights to make further responses if necessary, China's Minister of Foreign Affairs, which has insisted that the balloon was a civilian research airship that went off course, said. The agency also said China strongly disapproves of and protests against the U.S. attack, which it said is a clear overreaction and a serious violation of international practice. The U.S. military popped the balloon Saturday over the Atlantic Ocean after it traversed the continental United States for several days last week, including over sensitive military sites, according to the Associated Press. So there's the quick context, but let's go ahead and go to you first, Larry, for your initial reaction.
Oh, hey, I just can't believe it was allowed to even enter our airspace to begin with. We were tracking it, we knew about it, and we failed to prevent it, which is mind-boggling to me. What other country on this planet would allow that themselves? First of all, I mean, do you think China would allow a U.S. weather balloon to traverse their country, just gathering meteorological data? You know what I'm saying? So, right response at the end, way too long to get there. And the initial government reaction to hide it from us is just further evidence of what I always say on my podcast. I forgot to mention that I do run one as well. But it's our government hates us. Our government really hates us. They lie to us. They allow our national sovereignty to not only be usurped by a an adversarial country, but they do it themselves. They usurp our own liberty. So, right response took way too long to get there, and then the lies and the cover up. It's just a continuation of what we've all been going through for the past few years now.
Hmm. Yeah, and we'll definitely have to unpack a lot of what you said there. But Adelia, let's go to you for your reaction.
I don't know. I just think it's kind of rich, the minister's response, just saying, "Oh, it's a civilian research aircraft that went off course." I mean, given what we've seen from China and the CCP, I'm like, "Really? Your moves are calculated. I don't see this just being a willy-nilly, oh, it just accidentally showed up there." But that's just my impression of it.
Hmm. Michael, what about you?
There's clearly more to the story than the media would have us believe. Just like Larry was saying, it's disturbing that it would even be let into our airspace in a balloon. It's not as if it's being propulsed at a rate similar to any sort of military aircraft. Seems like there ought to be ways to have just redirected it or nudged it another direction before it came over U.S. territory. I don't know. Maybe that's just my own ignorance, but the fact I'm looking right now at the balloon path going clear through the states traveled quite a distance according to sightings, and for it only to have been dealt with when it was over the Atlantic is kind of ridiculous. Like it crossed over so much land that if it wanted to see something, then it saw it. The other side of the story, though, is fascinating to me. If it is a spy balloon taking intel over military bases, to what end? And what information is a balloon like that going to absorb that China doesn't already have access to by other means? I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what a lot of people have been saying. A lot of people have been saying, that China's already spying on us through other means, so why would they need a balloon? So I don't know. Larry, what do you think is actually going on here with this story?
Uh, so these weather balloons, they do have sophisticated cameras that China does not have the best satellite imagery available. So a high altitude camera from a balloon can give them more detailed images. So it is definitely not a meteorological balloon gathering that data, because that information is open sourced. So NASA open sources all of its meteorological data for the whole world to share. And there are several institutions around there that do that. What is the need for a balloon to traverse our entire country? I think, a couple things. It did want some good inside the atmosphere photographs that they can't get from their less than good quality satellites. And plus it was also to test our response, the administration's response to the violation of our sovereignty. And we saw how they responded. So they won big on both counts.
Yeah. Do you think that this is actually something that's going to lead to something kinetic?
No, it won't lead to anything kinetic in the near term. But China, hey, first of all, everybody in this country needs to understand China is not our friend. I spent 30 years in the military. I know, I've been to some briefings. I know their capabilities, well, as of 2017, but I also know that they are long-term thinkers and planners, very meticulous. We operate on a 5-year budget or a 2-year military budget and 5-year budgets. They think decades in advance. So this is just to prepare themselves for whatever future action they're going to take. So kinetic, if it does lead to kinetic, it's not in the near term, but it definitely bolsters their ability in the far term.
Yeah. What do you guys think about the claims that there were multiple balloons that have done similar missions like this during the Trump administration? Do you guys believe that?
No. Unless the Pentagon did not let him know about it. So, because we know, this idea is ridiculous that former President Trump would hide it from the American people, given that he has been an outspoken critic of China for decades, even before he was president. So once he became the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, I doubt that he would ever allow their whatever data collection, either atmospheric or military, their data collection device to fly over our sovereign territory without some kind of response. It's just it's a media doing cover fire for the inadequate, inept administration that's in place right now.
What do you think, Adelia? Do you agree with that?
I think I agree with that. I think you can say a lot of things about Trump, whether you like him or don't like him or whatever, but my kind of opinion on the guy is like he's probably been one of the best presidents we've had in recent years when it comes to the issue of foreign affairs. He dealt with that very strongly, okay, which we are not seeing in our current administration. And I agree with Larry about, it's just unless somebody didn't tell him it was happening, I don't hiding that because of how outspoken he was towards China's, actions.
Yeah. So the main thing that I'm thinking about here is I find it funny how, first of all, how long the balloon was actually, going across the U.S., but beyond that, the timing of it just is unfortunate. I feel like there was a lot bigger news stories going on in the middle of that week that we learned about this balloon flying through the U.S., and it does seem like everyone's attention is now fixated on that. So I don't know, but maybe I'm just someone who focuses a little bit more on domestic issues. But I don't know. I guess, did you guys feel like this was kind of the biggest news story of the week?
No, I don't think it was the biggest. I agree, it was a distraction, but it's a distraction that shines a light on the lengths that media and government will go to protect the ineptitude, or the lengths that they will go to cover up other stories. Like during this balloon phase, we let a 9/11 terrorist out of Gitmo go free. A 9/11 terrorist. He's now free to go. That wouldn't suit well. I think even 22 years after 9/11, the American people are still ready to see those people that were involved in that attack, planning and whatever execution, pay for their crimes instead of being let free. Among other things, like we'll talk about later, the Project Veritas and Pfizer and all this other stuff it's coming at us full force. So the American public are like cats, and the government and the media are definitely the red laser.
Mm. That's a good way of putting it. Michael, you mentioned earlier about whether or not China even needed this balloon to spy on us. Can you elaborate on that point?
I'm not educated well enough in this particular area, to know what is the tinfoil cap and what is genuine. We all hold tracking devices in our pockets nearly every day, so there's that element. And then also, my thought was on satellite imagery, like Larry was talking about. Um, yeah, I guess that's the gist of it. Is it seems like recognizance is more accessible now with the technological advances than it ever has been in the past. Used to be that we would actually have to send operatives into other territories, like you think of KGB actions in the Cold War and such. Um, those days are beyond us, and it makes me think, what is this getting that wouldn't have otherwise been accessible? But Larry kind of talked about that a little bit already.
Yeah. Adelia, you are probably the youngest one here. I think you are Gen Z, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So when it comes to Gen Z, I wanted to ask, how have you seen among your peers a recognition of TikTok and it being associated as a Chinese company at all? Because that's something that I know a lot of people that are very sort of mindlessly using TikTok,
Mhm.
but then a lot of people that are fairly politically active are all pretty aware that it's from China, and they talk about how in China it is suggesting videos that really focus in on self improvement, like exercise videos or videos on figuring things out mathematically, stuff like that. Whereas in the U.S. it's mostly twerking and dance videos. So I'm curious your take on that as our Gen Z expert for the night.
Oh, definitely. No, I think I was actually just thinking along those lines because, I mean, in China, they monitor what the youth, like, are consuming off of TikTok so closely, and I'm pretty sure I read something at some point that was like, their kids under 14 are only allowed on TikTok for, like, 40 minutes a day or something like that. Like, they are very regulated when it comes to their youth population, and then when it comes to the rest of the countries who aren't controlling that, I mean, like you said, we're seeing just mindless entertainment videos that are really not doing anything good for our subconscious or our mental state. But I think as far as the association with the Chinese government and it being a Chinese app, um, everybody in my circles is pretty well aware of it, to be honest. Even those who lean more liberal are like, "Oh, yeah, it's a Chinese app, like, we know this." And I think just over the last however many years, I mean, I haven't been around for very long, but we've become really desensitized in the United States to the idea of being monitored, of our every move being tracked. I mean, people are just so used to it. It's like being desensitized to violence in movies and video games. It's just the same thing, except for it's like in our lives right now. It's like, oh, Google just popped up and was like, I didn't hear that correctly. And we just go, oh, Google. like it's this normal thing. But it's like they really are listening to you through your phone. There are AI technologies that are gradually developing to become more and more detail oriented on how we live our lives and how humans function. And as far as Gen Z's like awareness of it, I would say as a whole, it's just an attitude of and so what? Like we all know this. Like there's not any sort of reason, I guess, that people feel we should be concerned about it, which is a concern to me. But, you know, I guess that's kind of how I see it playing out in my age range.
Mm. Well, Larry, what goes through your mind when you hear that Gen Z is very used to a third party listening on all their conversations and their response is meh?
By design.
Mm.
It's by design. It's to get we. She said desensitized to being monitored, and who's doing the monitoring is government, right? Mainly it's government. Of course, you'll have business opportunity, businesses that'll advertise strictly to you, but government is monitoring our moves. I mean, and people don't think that because they don't know about our Constitution. That's a Fourth and Fifth Amendment violations, right? There's a recent proposal for a gas tax to be eliminated for the per mileage tax. How do we think government is going to tax people per their miles? By us kindly reporting it? No, they're going to track our movements. And of course, they've desensitized an entire generation. And I'll just pay that tax. But they're tracking your movements. They know what stores you go to, what food you go to buy. If you're going to a gun store, it's this ESG credit scores that are coming up, or ESG scores that are coming up. It's government tracking. And again, they desensitize an entire generation of people. It's okay. It's the slippery slope.
Yeah. And we are well on our way towards the bottom, but we're not at the bottom yet. So don't worry. There's more to look forward to, I'm sure.
But we're getting fat. We're fastly approaching terminal velocity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. So, well, shoot, it's unfortunate that we are in this day and age, but it makes me think of the amendment that Tennessee is currently considering for whether or not the state should be allowed to own stock and like shareholders, in private businesses and private banks. Have you guys heard much about that?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Delia, you've done some reporting on some of that, I believe, right?
Not on the banks and stuff like that. No, it's not really my area of expertise. I usually get thrown a lot of house bills to kind of dig into and explain. I'm past English major. I got the words.
Oh, perfect. So basically, the amendment, from my understanding, is going to. It's a proposed constitutional amendment that would change the Tennessee state constitution that would allow the state to actually buy stock in private companies. So, and this is obviously a big issue, but on the surface, it sounds pretty innocent. But I mean, ultimately, if I own a hat company and I'm also buddy buddies with the governor or legislators, I can encourage them to mandate that all Tennesseans wear my hat on Tuesdays, and then suddenly there we go. I think that's a talking about that slippery slope. That's a slippery slope of mandating things in legislation that can boost the earnings of private company, because ultimately the state will then have an incentive to directly benefit from making sales go up for this hat company, right? So I don't know. That was a big concern to me, and I feel like that's something that really is going to be probably marketed completely different than how I'm sort of laying it out here, and I'm by no means an expert in this, but I mean, that was concerning. So Larry, you ran for office. So could you tell us a little bit about why you chose to run, and kind of what hearing these kind of future legislation, future amendments, what that does to you?
Well, that amendment really just irks me, because you notice they have to amend the Constitution in order for the state to gain an interest in a bank, right? Because it's an it's outside government's primary role. A lot of people, if they've just read our founding documents, they would understand what government's primary role, which they've far exceeded here in decades, ever since the 16th Amendment was passed in the U.S. Constitution. But government's role is only to secure the liberty of the people. If we allow the government to take a controlling interest in a bank, what is that going to do to the other banks? What is that going to do to financial or fiscal policy? Where is the state going to invest its retirement incomes into? or what. So it's an unconstitutional role. So that's why they have to amend the Constitution. Now, I decided to run for office. Being in the Navy for 30 years, I followed politics on the periphery. I've been a conservative my whole life. I guess I was weaned on that. My parents were conservatives, but that's not an overarching concern if you're on active duty. I mean, your overarching concern is to come back from a war zone safe to your wife and kids. And then it was after I retired, though, that I just saw the dirtiness of it, and that people aren't just doing our primary role. So I thought I was doing my role by enlisting and serving my country, but there's a bigger role that our constitutional republic and all the 50 states require of the citizen. Citizenship in a republic, which Teddy Roosevelt talked about in a great speech at Sorbonne in France. But it requires our daily involvement in government for our own self-governance. Because if we give up our right to self-govern, we're giving it up to somebody if we're not taking care of it ourselves. And these somebodies is what I've termed on my podcast called the new aristocracy. They're created, it's a ruling elite created by the apathy in our country that, 50% of the population, 50% of the people eligible to vote in our country vote for national elections. Off-year elections, it gets down to like 8 or 10%. In Sevier County in 2022, the county midterms, we were down to 4% of the eligible voters voted. When that happens, we lose our rights, because if government grows, it is a zero-sum game. If something goes up, that goes down. So when government grows, our liberty goes away. So I chose to, serve my country once again by getting into politics, getting people involved, getting the cronyism and the unconstitutional actions out of our government, because a lot of people just don't understand that Constitution is meant to limit people, or not limit people, but limit government. That's the way they're designed. But we've been operating outside that for decades now. We need to get back to that. So I just decided to jump in the arena again and defend the Constitution.
Mm. And you did not choose to run in the Republican primary. So could you tell us a little bit about why you chose to do that?
So in Tennessee, I believe that the Tennessee GOP is one of the most corrupt political parties on the planet, because if I had wanted to run as a Republican, I would not have been able to, because I don't meet their extra constitutional residency requirement of having lived and voted in 3 of the last 4 primaries for my county. So I retired here in 2017, so I didn't meet that wicket. And then the state party also instituted what I call pay for play, to run as a representative for the GOP. Just in the primary, I would have had to pay the GOP or gift them or donate to them $500 just to get on their ticket, to get their blessing. So I'm a firm believer in the Constitution, and neither of those are requirements to run for office. So the state GOP decided to do these extra constitutional things, and I decided to call them on it. So I ran as an independent, so I don't have to play by their rules. The state GOP wants, if you've just looked back at the past couple of elections here in our state, they have played dirty and fast and loose with rules that only benefits the party, nothing to do with the national platform or the people of Tennessee.
Do you feel like that was ultimately beneficial to run as an independent? Do you think that hurt your chances of being elected, or?
It definitely hurt my chances of being elected because of the apathy that's in the public with straight vote party line voting. I talked to several people after I ran and lost that, hey, how come I know I talked to you, why didn't you vote for me? Or no, I know you live where one of my signs were. Did you know about me running? And they go, yeah, but since you were an independent, I thought you were a Democrat. So most people equate liberals or independents as a Democrat or somebody that would split the vote to make sure that the Republican doesn't get elected. And here in Sevier County, if you have an R after your name, you're definitely not winning an election. So that means we have Democrats that put an R after their name so they can get elected. So it definitely hurt. But the good news out of it is the number of votes I got equated to the number of houses I knocked on the door of. So the message does resonate if I personally visit people, but I can't personally visit because I do have to work and pay the bills, and my job takes me out of the state a lot. So I couldn't knock on 18,000 doors.